This discussion series is organised by the Education SIG, Special Interest Group of the Design Research Society. So basically, we represent, or we try to represent, as many design educators as we possibly can round about the world who are particularly interested in the research and scholarship of design education. And in that light, today's speaker, Ingri Strand, is definitely someone to look out for and listen to in that regard. Definitely both a scholar and a researcher whose work is really interesting and quite powerful in some ways. Just before we do that, what I'm going to do is quickly let you know of the next event. And that's going to be Decolonising and Indigenising Design Education. And that's going to be insights from three very interesting practitioners who come from different sort of contexts round about the world. I'll put a link into that event in the chat in just a second, and I'll also put a link to where all the future events are going to be as well. The other last thing just to say before we start is the Education SIG is moving to the Mighty platform as part of the DRS shift. DRS shifts to where we actually sort of inhabit online. So if you want to continue the conversation there, I'll put a link into the into where we can keep the conversation going on the Mighty platform after this session. So anyway, without further ado, I'd like to maybe just hand over to you, Ingrid, to introduce yourself and to present your topic today, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you. I'm ready. So let's see if I can share here. Okay, 2 screens, it's not always easy, but here we are. Okay.
We are seeing the presenter view this time, Ingrid.
Oh,
sorry.
Yeah. Oh,
that'll be the 2 screens thing, don't worry.
Okay, let's try again.
Just love how Microsoft tried to make this really, really helpful and useful, and in doing so, they make it even worse.
Yeah. No, but I think I have it now. Just do it just when we test it. And then I think we are
perfect. Beautiful.
On the right one. Yeah. Great. So my name is Ingri Strand, and I'm an associate professor at Oslo Metropolitan University. And my background is as a teacher in art and crafts and media education. And last year, I defended a PhD in educational sciences with the thesis Education for Participation in Urban Planning, Virtual Reality and Teaching Strategies to Support Spatial Literacy. A part of the PhD defense in Norway is to hold a trial lecture based on a given title, and this presentation is based on that trial lecture. In the title for this talk, I use the term Early Years Design Education. In Norway, this is closely linked to the subject art and crafts, which I will introduce shortly. New technologies is something I understand as recent digital innovations or technologies recently come into mainstream use, and I will give some examples throughout the talk. The original title included the 3 question words what, how, and why, and these have informed the structure of this presentation. Firstly, I will look at what technologies have been introduced and which challenges are linked to the choice of technologies. Secondly, how have new technologies been introduced and which challenges are related to the practical introduction of the new technologies. Finally, I will discuss why new technologies should or should not be introduced and the challenges that are specifically linked to early years design education. Here I will use 3 different new technologies as examples and discuss what these may offer the students, but also problematic issues related to these technologies. An important arena for early years design education in Norway is the subject art and crafts, which aims to prepare the pupils for everyday life and a workplace that requires innovation, practical skills, and the ability to make aesthetic and ethical choices. In this subject, the students engage in practical work with aesthetic processes. They explore visual expressions and different materials and imagine what has not yet been created. The subject follows the students all throughout compulsory education. from year 1 when they start as 6-year-olds until year 10 when they are 16 years old. Art and crafts is the 5th largest subject in Norwegian compulsory education and thus makes up an important part of the early years design education. I will now go into the challenges of what, starting with a look at the foundation for what is happening in schools, the Education Act and the curriculum. The Education Act states that education should open doors to the world and the future. In an increasingly digitalized world, I understand digital competency and knowledge of new technologies as an important part of being prepared for the future, although it's not directly mentioned. The Norwegian curriculum consists of 2 parts, the core curriculum and the subject curricula. The core curriculum describes 5 basic skills, which are reading, writing, numeracy, oral skills, and digital skills. The curriculum states that all teachers in all subjects must support the pupils in their work with their basic skills. The core curriculum also describes 3 interdisciplinary topics. In that of sustainable development, technology is mentioned specifically. The core curriculum here states, while technological development may help to solve problems, it may also create new ones. Knowledge about technology implies understanding which dilemmas may arise due to the use of technology and how these can be dealt with. Here, the ambivalent relationship between technology and sustainability is stated, while the need for knowledge about technology for a more sustainable future is emphasized. The subject-specific curriculum defines the basic skills in art and crafts. Here, digital skills are connected to using digital tools and media in all parts of the creative process, from inspiration and testing to documentation and presentation. Programming is specifically mentioned. Other central parts of digital skills are knowing the rules of copyright and privacy. Mastering of digital skills is described as being able to design one's own digital products that create experiences and communicate emotions, ideas, and opinions. New technology or digital tools are specifically mentioned in the competency aims for all levels. Here, exemplified with competency aims after year 7 and year 10. As shown here, the subject-specific curriculum facilitates the use of new technologies on the subject's own terms, as it emphasizes the use of technology and digital tools in various creative processes. While keeping this open, some use of digital tools and new technologies is required. There is no mention of specific technologies, which allows the teachers to make their own choices, as well as using future technologies we do not yet know. I will now move on to describe the current status, where we see that Norwegian schools of today are highly digitalized. As of fall of 2022, 98% of lower secondary students had their own digital devices. These devices are mostly tablets in primary school, whereas in lower secondary school, computers or Chromebooks are most common. Time spent on the computer has also increased drastically. In the Monitor study in 2013, 26% of Year 9 students state to use a computer in class for 4 hours or more per week, while in 2019, this number has increased to 62%. 36.6% of Year 10 students stated in 2023 that they spend 3 to 5 hours on digital learning activities per day. A recent study observed digital units being used in 95% of classes in Year 10 and VG3 of upper secondary education. When we look at the subject art and crafts, the picture changes. Almost 60% of Year 9 students state to use a computer quite rarely, very rarely, or never. The teacher's answers also place art and crafts as one of the least digital subjects, although they describe computers being used slightly more, with 41% stating to use computers to a small or very small extent. Only 17% of the teachers state to use computers to a large or very large extent. I have not found studies mapping which new technologies are used in art and crafts, and there is likely a very large variation between schools and teachers. In 2019, a year before programming was included in the curriculum, many school owners facilitated for working with programming. 35% of school owners in the monitor study facilitated for programming, while 3D printing and VR/AR was less common. It is not specified in which subjects these technologies are used. It is likely that these numbers have increased, with programming staying high due to its specific mentioning in the curricula. In an observation study by Borgen and colleagues, digital devices were used in many of the observed art and crafts lessons. Tablets were used for both entertainment and to search for inspiration and information. Additionally, one teacher said that the students used Microsoft Excel for creating embroidery patterns. In a study on makerspace teachers, the teachers reported that their schools were well equipped with technologies such as 3D printers, electronics, vinyl and laser cutters, and microcontrollers. The teachers applied for internal and external funding or borrowed equipment from municipalities and science centers. There are challenges related to choosing which technology to use. Due to regulations for purchasing and privacy, large actors that can provide all-encompassing solutions are favored. Some large actors have targeted schools, branding themselves as reliable and safe. One example of this is Apple, which offers a certification journey for teachers and schools. The decisions on which digital tools and learning resources are bought is increasingly centralized to the school owners. Teachers state that to a smaller degree influence which digital devices, resources, and teaching aids are chosen, and rather points towards the school leadership and school owner as the decision makers. As we have seen, the region schools are highly digitalized, whereas the art and crafts classes seem to be a more analog space. Traditional crafts and practical processes in the workshops are valued in the current curriculum and by teachers. Teachers interviewed by Borgen and colleagues see the subject as an arena where the pupils can get different experiences than in the other subjects. Large, all-encompassing solutions, which are preferred by the schools and school owners, might not cover the specific needs of art and crafts. Art and crafts teachers might not influence which technologies are bought and are left to use what they have. Students using Excel spreadsheets for creating embroidery patterns illustrates this challenge. Non-payment solutions will usually not be an option, as these often conflict with privacy regulations and the Education Act, who declares the school as an advertisement-free zone. The curriculum is a foundation for what the teachers choose to introduce. The competency aims does not specify which technologies or digital tools should be used, but programming is mentioned, which obliges the schools and teachers to include this. There are also existing support structures for equipping makerspaces, which opens possibilities for using technology such as 3D printers, laser and vinyl cutters. This makes some technologies more available than others. I will now move on to how new technologies are introduced and which challenges are related to the practical introduction of the new technologies. The COVID-19 pandemic led to a strengthening of the school's digital infrastructure and competency levels. The time after the pandemic, where the society has become more digitalized, is often referred to as a new normal. In recent years, we have seen a backlash against this. Parental groups have engaged in public debate, arguing for a more restrictive use of digital devices. The government-appointed Screen Use Committee has gathered comprehensive knowledge on how screen use affects children and adolescents. In their recommendation from November 2024, they emphasize the need for a balance between digital and analog activities in schools. They also point out that the government needs to ensure sufficient funding for the teachers to have genuine methodological freedom to choose between analog and digital teaching aids. We also see a more restrictive line in school owners and school regulations. Most schools restricts the students' access to mobile phones during the school day. Oslo municipality restricts the internet access of pupils in year 1 to 4. Most schools have set age limits for using AI tools, hindering the youngest students' access to AI tools. The curriculum, white papers, national strategies, and grants constitutes a framework for the digitalization of schools. In addition, each municipality and school should have a digital strategy. These have laid the foundation for the digitalization of the schools. At the same time, the teacher's methodological freedom is an important principle. This means that these documents should not prescribe specific technologies, methods, and activities. While this allows the teacher's own decision, it might mean that new technologies are not being introduced and make it challenging to develop relevant support structures. Such as when programming was included in the curriculum renewal in 2020, the Norwegian Directorate for Education and Training launched a competency package in programming and computational thinking, aiming to support teachers in including this in their teaching. I will here give an overview of how influential framework conditions challenges the introduction of new technologies. Students' digital competency. Norwegian Year 9 students participated in the International Computer and Information Literacy Study of 2023, which maps their digital competency and computational thinking. Although the Norwegian students score higher than the international average, the study showed a significant drop in their digital competency from previous years. A high digitalization of schools does not on its own provide digital competency. A new Norwegian study suggests that students master the making of multimodal projects, programming, and the use of artificial intelligence, while struggling with basic skills such as naming, saving, and finding documents. Teachers' digital competency is, based on self-reports, steadily increasing, and in 2022, most teachers ranked their digital competency as medium. However, an expert group of students that contributed to the Screen News Committee's work have stated that both teachers and students have too low of a digital competency. The discrepancy between this and the self-reports may be explained by how the teachers' competency levels affect how they use new technology in the classroom. Teachers with a high digital competency see themselves as introducing new technologies early, whereas those with a low digital competency are more reluctant to use new technology and are more afraid to fail or lose control. It is possible that teachers generally master the technology in common use, but that few teachers seek out and experiment with new technologies. The development of teachers' digital competency is based on informal measures such as trial and error, self-study, and colleague mentoring, while courses and continuing education are less influential factors. This might be because they to a small extent participate in formal competency development measures. The school leaders also state to value informal and formal sharing of knowledge and experiences between colleagues. Keeping up with updates is time-consuming. As art and crafts is a practical aesthetical subject, the teachers have less time to prepare classes and develop their competency level. It is therefore challenging for the art and crafts teachers to keep up with the constant updates of new technologies. Economical limitations is a challenge in many schools. Teachers report that their budget does not allow for buying even basic materials, and buying expensive equipment specifically for art and crafts, such as digital pens for drawing on tablets or programmable sewing machines, is therefore unrealistic for most. Few devices, but large classes. Teachers also often report about large group sizes, which prohibits some activities and use of certain tools. While not specifically mentioned in these studies, this makes the use of VR glasses and 3D printers challenging, as schools often buy only one or few of these, if any, leading the rest of the group to wait for turns. Maintenance of devices and equipment is also something that may hinder long-term use of new technologies and can be related to economy or competency. The use of these technologies is often driven by enthusiasts, and the loss of a key person is a common reason for different technologies in schools going out of use. prioritization in the subject. Traditional craft techniques and practical experiences with materials in workshops is valued in the subject. And some teachers see art and crafts as a subject where the students should get other experiences and as an arena to develop practical and fine motor skills. While some are enthusiastic about new technologies, others are more reluctant to use technology and find the digital parts of the subject challenging and choose to use it less. Students also expect art and crafts to be a subject where they make something with their hands, but digital tools are less relevant. One student in a recent study by Borgen and colleagues expressed that art and crafts classes give them a welcome pause from sitting in front of computers. To summarize, the curriculum, white papers, national and local strategies, states that education should provide students with digital competency, but does not give clear guidelines for how new technologies should be introduced. Instead, much is left to the teacher's methodological freedom. There are several framework conditions that make the introduction of new technologies challenging, such as the competency of students and teachers and constraints in time and economy. In art and crafts, traditional techniques and work with materials is valued, which may lead many teachers to down-prioritize new technologies. Recently, there's also been a shift in attitudes towards technologies from technology optimism towards a more restrictive use of technologies. I will now turn to discuss why new technologies should or should not be introduced in early years design education. The introduction of new technologies means reducing or removing something else. It is therefore important to reflect critically on what new technology can contribute with for the students' learning. Some new technologies are fleeting and may not be accessible for long. The usefulness of a focus of mastery of specific tools rather than general technology understanding can be questioned. There is also the question to what competencies are important in an uncertain future. There has been much focus on 21st century skills to prepare children and young people for living in a rapidly changing digital society. Digital literacy is an important component of the 21st century skills. Recently, there has been a growing attention towards competencies that allow for self-preparedness and self-sufficiency. In the art and crafts subject, this can be linked to the making and reparations of clothes or items for the home. Should the students spend less time on learning these skills and instead prioritize working with new technologies in early years design education too? I will now go on to discuss why new technologies should or should not be introduced by using 3 examples of new technologies relevant for early years design education: digital drawing or painting, 3D printers, and AI generative text-to-image technology. A digital tablet and pen enable a digital drawing or painting process simulating the traditional technique, as the pen is used to draw directly onto the tablet. Digital drawing and painting have been explored in various articles and masterclasses. These studies often highlight new possibilities offered by the technology, such as the possibility to freely experiment with and combine different techniques, zoom in and out, and erase mistakes. Photos can easily be used as reference material or be included in collages. In an educational context, these possibilities have been suggested to increase the students' motivation and sense of mastery. Anne Elmis Westergren also suggests to move away from the desk and instead combine drawing on tablets with more physical activities. Digital drawing and painting do miss some of the experiences that traditional techniques give, such as tactility and the direct connection between the hand and the material. The sound of the pencil against paper or the smell of a marker is also lost. This reduces the embodied learning opportunities that drawing has the potential to provide. Silje Bergman also emphasized that this technology actualizes the need for learning about copyright, as copying, manipulating, and publishing of others' work is made easy. This is not just a challenge as Bergman sees it. Instead, taking inspiration or referencing other artworks can be an entryway for understanding copyright regulations. The students do, however, need supervision of a competent teacher to navigate these processes. 3D printers are often associated with the maker movement, which promotes the use of new technologies in creative processes. It is centered around the maker, the creative human being that has a drive to create and make. It is often connected to informal learning arenas that facilitate active learning. The maker movement's ideas originate from Seymour Papers' constructionism, where it is seen as critical to give students the agency to control the making process. Technology is used in the learning process with the aim to provide knowledge and skills to influence society's digital development. This free, student-centered learning process is challenging to transform into formalized education that has structured learning aims, large groups, and a set timetable with little time for free exploration. Instead, the focus often shifts towards learning to use technology. Christensen, with colleagues, has pointed out that in-service teacher training often consists of fast-paced, scripted workshops with predetermined outcomes. Beginners tend to be fascinated with the technology, but also overwhelmed by the endless possibilities. It is therefore common amongst beginners to print a downloaded model just to see how the 3D printer works, rather than design one's own object first. Paulo Blickstein coined the term keychain syndrome after he led a series of workshops that turned into what he called a keychain factory, as the children wanted to keep on producing the keychains they had learned to make in the first session. Makerspace equipment allows for creating aesthetically attractive and impressive objects that require relatively small effort for the creator. This can incentivize mass production of simple products rather than invention. There is also the reason to question the sustainability of mass-produced small plastic items with a small or non-existent creative process behind. There is, however, a more sustainable side of 3D printing, as this technology can also be used to produce small spare parts for simple repairs, instead of buying something new. This was something my colleague Peter Håkonsen did when a part in our office sink broke. This led to an explorative process of creating something that solves a problem, in line with the ideals of the maker movement and early years design education. The 3D printers do themselves also require some maintenance. Schools can get their own 3D printers after collaborating with science centers, special municipal projects, or if the municipalities have extra money in the budget. This does not, however, mean that there is a budget for replacing the plastic filament, the printer's material. To avoid useless machines piling up, the introduction of 3D printers needs to be incorporated into a long-term strategic plan. Text-to-image generative technology has been developed since 2014, and awareness and development of this technology has been rapid since the launch of DALL-E in 2021. The technology is used by writing textual input to receive a generated image. Articulating your ideas into a textual prompt stands out from the largely tacit processes dominating art and crafts. It also changes the role of the creator from being actively involved in the whole process to being more of an art director or editor who chooses which pictures to use from generated alternatives. On the other hand, generative AI makes visualization available for those who lack skills or have disabilities that makes drawing by hand difficult or impossible. This entails a democratization of visualizing. There have been raised concerns about who has the real ownership of the images, the one writing the prompts or the generator. In one study by Vartiainen and Tedre, students in year 8 and 9 reflected on this question, and the opinions were divided. While one pupil stated that the AI had done the work and aligned it to cheating, another one disagreed. Instead, he emphasized his own role in developing the prompts and viewed the process as a cooperation with the AI. While everyone can input a short prompt and receive a generated image, It is not that easy to create an image that accurately reflects your vision. It necessitates familiarity with the system's capabilities, limitations, and learning some keywords that will steer the output in the intended direction, a practice that has been called prompt engineering. It is also necessary to raise the issue with the sustainability of using generative AI. Due to the required computational power, the generators draw a large amount of electricity, and a lot of water is needed to cool down the hardware. Text-to-image generators should therefore be used carefully to reduce the wasting of resources. A study by Silvenoinen and colleagues, where text-to-image generators are used to engage children in sustainability challenges and solutions, is thus placed in an ambivalent position. While the preprint describes how this activity enabled the children to explore complex environmental concepts, with generated images serving as a window into new possibilities, the use of the generators themselves is not sustainable. Here we might see what John Dewey describes as a miseducative experience. Pupils learn not only what the teachers have intended, such as about sustainability, but also that text-to-image generators is a technology they should use freely. An important part of such projects is therefore to critically reflect on the resources being used. The examples show that new technologies can contribute positively, but they can also have some drawbacks. With digital drawing, students can build on their traditional drawing skills by expanding these into new modalities, but the tactile and sensuous experiences are missing. 3D printers can be used for printing almost anything, including spare parts for repairs, but often end up being used for simple production without the creative process behind. AI generative text-to-image technology allows everyone to produce images rapidly, but challenges the core value of art and crafts, as the process is concerned about articulating a prompt rather than developing the image by hand. The use of these technologies raises questions about which knowledge should be developed. The tacit embodied knowledge developed through creative processes in workshops using materials and traditional techniques, or familiarity with technology that opens new possibilities, but where the creator has a more distant role in the making process, perhaps building on or using others' works. Early years design education will likely contain a combination of these, but as the introduction of new technologies means that there is less time for what is already included, it is necessary to reflect on questions like these. As illustrated by the examples, there are no simple answers as to why some technologies should be introduced and others shouldn't. What is important is to look at how new technologies are used, which is why I will now move on to some recommendations for the future. The choice of new technologies should be linked to pedagogical and didactical aims and fit the subject-specific needs. Few technologies that the students will benefit from is better than to have many options that are not properly utilized or does not fit the aims of early years design education. The introduction of new technologies should follow a strategical plan that the teachers can influence and should secure continued use of the technology. This includes making sure that all practical issues will be in place, providing time and resources for the teachers to learn how to use them. The educational use of the technology should focus on how these can be used in creative, open-ended projects, rather than learning to use the technology in tasks with predetermined outcomes. New technologies can often lead to practices that are unsustainable or challenges copyright regulations. But using new technology is also necessary to understand it. The teachers should facilitate critical reflection on these topics while working with new technologies. I've also found few studies that aim to map which technologies are used in early years design education and how and why they are used. Most studies mapping the digital status cover all subjects, and there is little attention towards art and crafts. I therefore suggest more research on this topic to get more knowledge about both the status of today and in which direction to move forward. Thank you very much.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you very much, Ingrid. That was greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. Yeah, there's quite a lot in there. I mean, I've said this before as a general point, but I think a lot of the discussions and meetings we have, it tends to focus on higher education, sometimes rarely further education, sometimes secondary education. And I think we tend to look over the foundations that we are actually building on in higher education, which is in the early education years or early years education spaces. And it was lovely to hear you just re-emphasize that again, Ingrid. The basic literacies, if we build a better foundation, just imagine what we could do with students with greater literacies and greater agencies. And I love the way that you also connected it very strongly, or this is the sense that I got, that those literacies are connected to words like agency, confidence, and value, not just about the skills or the surface stuff. This is very much about the both the individual value, but the individual values, their contribution to a wider grouping. I think that's really important that we don't lose sight of that. We don't tend to pay enough attention, I don't think, to early years education. I've said it before, but yeah, I'll repeat it again. Hopefully that's enough of me waffling to give someone else a chance to think of a question for Ingri. If no one does, I'll maybe jump in with chair's privilege. But please feel free to stick your hand up or stick a question in the chat. Oh, sorry, I haven't checked actually the chat to see if there's any questions in there. We're waiting for the first one. So I guess maybe if no one else is going to jump in, maybe it is round about that notion of literacy. But as I say, literacy connected to agency, confidence, and value. Because as you say, if as an educator, you're not necessarily IT literate yourself, then that has a massive impact on the agency and the confidence that you project with respect to that. And I guess I don't leave whether I'm going to pull you in on this, but I guess there's something round about what we intend literacies to be in early years education. And I wonder if you could very quickly maybe just give a very quick description of the Norwegian context, because I think it is important to restate that as well. In the UK, we don't necessarily have design literacy. We've got a bit of IT literacy now creeping into the curriculum, but I know that there's a lot of context around the world where the focus is still on, either language and arithmetic or numerical literacies. And these other human literacies tend not to feature as much. So I wonder if you could maybe say something about the Norwegian context, how important design literacy is in that, and maybe how that relates to the IT literacy and how those things go together as a kind of collective response to educating young designers, if that makes sense. Or is that another subject area, Ingrid?
Or was it? I thought maybe it was a question for Liv, but yeah, okay, I misunderstood. But yeah, I think it's in practice it varies greatly. So of course, we at university level are very concerned about the literacies, but then what's actually happening in schools is very different. We have, of course, lots of great teachers with high education, but then we also see that this is a subject that misses a lot of that has a lot of unskilled teachers or with other subjects in the specialization. So that's a bit different, the actual prioritization of the subject. So what's actually happening in the schools is a bit different. But I think, of course, the aims is to develop this sense of literacy in the students. Yeah, and I see Liv, you have raised your hand.
Yep, go for it, Liv.
Sure.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you for your presentation, Ingrid. And I know some of your earlier works also. Just a little bit about the literacy. Literacy, as used in many writings and research, is about competence. And the competence is, of course, plural, and it's connected to level of education. So design literacy is something else at this stage you were talking about compared to at the university level. But I think in your presentation, you very nicely put forward some of the points that we discuss when trying to find out what's important for design literacy today. And this is perhaps, and was perhaps different from literacy 50 years ago, even if we didn't talk about literacy then. But as you mentioned, 21st century skills, they have a focus on digital literacy. So to say, what is it nice to teach young people in primary and lower secondary school, for instance, in order to handle their future lives. But if we have time, I don't say you should do it now, Ingrid, but in your PhD, you wrote about spatial literacy in connection with user participation in urban planning. And then in a way, you perhaps could link it to some more practical, your practical research. But you don't have to do it at once, but if there is no other questions, it would be nice.
Oh, feel free, go for it.
Yeah,
I think that's actually
something
quite a powerful example. Yeah.
Yeah, so spatial literacy, that is about having all the spatial skills, like understanding volumes, understanding how an object looks when it's rotated, but not only these measurable spatial skills, but also being able to use them in complex processes, being able to communicate about them, participate in processes, and actively using them in various complex projects and such as architectural assignments, for example, that we have also a lot of in art and crafts subject. Oh my gosh, I lost my thread a bit here, but I think what is important is to focus on these literacies, because it shifts the focus a bit from just doing smaller tasks, as we also see with digital literacy. It often ends up being just use this exact program or be able to do this small task. But what is important for me when we talk about the literacies is that we prepare the students for a very unpredictable future, where we don't know which competencies are relevant and how they will be used. We see now that AI has come in, how everything is changing very rapidly. So it's very difficult to predict what will be the important competencies. So I think to focus on the developing of the literacies is important, because that gives a deeper foundation, a deeper understanding, rather than to just being able to do specific tasks.
Excellent. I do have a follow-up on that one, but I'm going to see if there's anyone else that has a question, because I certainly don't want to hog the... Jenna, do you want to come in on your mic, or do you want to type the question in? Feel free. No pressure. Hiya. How you doing?
Hi, thanks so much, Ingrid. That was amazing. I'm just wondering, I'm from the UK. Do you feel that your country values design education in primary and secondary settings? From my experience, we've had it stripped out. We're struggling with a pipeline, and I work in university. Do you feel that there is a cultural, societal value of design education in primary settings?
Well, in many ways, yes, because as I said, it's still a large subject in schools, and it follows the students throughout 10 years. So in that way, it's valued, and but maybe it's also something we take for granted a bit, because that's just how it is here. But however, we do see that there's some down prioritization of the subject in terms of economy, in terms of which teachers are chosen. And as many countries, I think we see a focus towards mathematics, for example, and other STEM subjects. It's also which subjects have tests being performed on the students' skills. So we have reading and mathematics being measured, reading and writing and mathematics being measured. And of course, every time the results are not up to par, it's always like we have to increase these subjects. And it's, of course, that's on the terms of subjects like art and crafts.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, Liv, did you want to come in on that?
Yes.
Or was it something else? Sorry.
No, it was from Gina Gardner, just about the Norwegian context, because something special happened in Norway in 1960 compared to the other Nordic countries. That was when in Norway you had drawing, you had woodwork for boys, and you had textile for girls, and they were merged into one subject. But none of the other Nordic countries did that experiment. But this experiment has followed us through different kind of ups and downs. So, as Ingrid said, it's the 5th largest subject when you come to scheduled classes. It's larger than science. So it is a kind, but I think perhaps it's important to see this in context with culture, because Norway has been a poor country far up north. Craft has been very central and in rural districts. So in a way, I think we have some traditions. And what Ingrid now introduces is how these new technologies incorporate, connect with this craft culture, which is part of our cultural history in a way.
And to build on that, I think it's also interesting how our subject is always evolving, including new technologies, and not staying as historical subject of old craft traditions. But it's been developing throughout the years and adding also a democratic part, for example, with participation in future democratic processes. It's been so it's much more than the traditional crafts, and I think that keeps it also relevant. But of course, it makes it also challenging to teach. So it requires teachers to be competent.
Yeah, definitely. There's quite a few things that require teachers to be competent. It's quite interesting when you poke at that question. That's where we go there. Yeah, does anyone else have any other questions? If not, I wouldn't mind actually picking up on that one. Ingrid, if that's okay, and Liv, I don't know whether either of you can shed light on this, but you know, there is something about being a designer that brings a type of knowledge of being a designer of design into play, and that not the transfer of that knowledge. I believe it's the reconstruction of that knowledge in the learner. It's not necessarily passed on from the expert or from the person who knows a bit more about design, but certainly being alongside someone who knows a bit more about design can either guide you along the right path or the wrong path, or can maybe give you confidence that uncertainty is okay or whatever it might be. So you touched on it as well, Ingrid, that need for expertise. You know, you do need to come from that discipline. You know, when you're being taught mathematics, I found, personally speaking, when I was learning maths, that being taught by mathematicians who were working in mathematics was the sweet spot for me personally, because their experience as well as their knowledge could be brought to bear in a situation. So yeah, I mean, is that a challenge? Obviously, I think you maybe partly answered this question. How do you respond to that challenge, I guess, in an education system?
Yeah, I think part of the challenge, although I haven't is not a research-based observation necessarily, but I think there's a tendency towards those who are confident in the subjects, the teachers who are confident in the subjects, allow for more open, designly ways of working in the subject, where the students can find their own way to work more in free and experimentative processes.
أنا ما
Whereas
عرفت ألاء.
a lot of the
أنا أعتذر عن امبارح والله يا آلاء، بس أنا نمت فعلا من التعب.
if someone who is less confident in the subject tend to more look at images, for example, of products and then just aim for a predetermined outcome, smaller tasks, and give the students less freedom, and even down to which color you have to paint with, for example. So that's that's also a challenge, but. Of course, we on university level we try to argue for the importance of competent teachers, not only because we educate them, but also we see how this affects the students, and it's different what each student in each school learn. It's linked to the teacher, but also, of course, access to workshops, access to materials, and many different things. So we try to highlight how it's important for the schools to prioritize this, because it has a subject that has a very big potential, but it's not always utilized.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any other questions for Ingri? Okay, in that case, I'm going to cycle back to one of my old favourite chestnuts. It's about as soon as we frame something as digital or not digital. And you mentioned that explicitly with the non-materiality of some things, particularly with respect to drawing or sketching. One of the things that we're trying to get across now in the way that we introduce at higher education level, or reintroduce the physical act of drawing and also the digital act of drawing, is that these things are not necessarily you do it this way or you do it that way, and actually actively trying to get students to engage in hybrid ways, either sketching and taking it into digital space, or digital doing something digitally and then printing it to play with it in a material space. We're really trying to break it apart so that students come away with different, if you like, mini processes stuck to them because they prefer them or because they've had a go at them. So I just wonder, Ingri, when you talked about it being material or non-material or digital, not digital, have you got any good studies of where the hybridity like really helps, going between these modes? Or second of all, is there a bit of a mindset thing that needs to shift there in terms of whether we're acting digitally or physically or?
Yeah, maybe. I think it's the actual practices are very varied. I think based on some of my previous work, I know some teachers see it as it's mandatory. We have to do something digital, so we will just do one small digital project and then we can check it off the list. But of course. The ideal, I think, is to also work hybrid and combine it. So one of the things I've been working on with some colleagues is a study where we have used AI to generate patterns and then transfer them to fabric. Where the students use silk screen printing and transfer the pattern to the fabric to make tote bags. And that's seems like that also created the shift in the students, because also with the students there is this idea that if it's just on a screen, it's not that important, it disappears in a way after. So transferring it to a material was important, I think, to value the work in total. Yeah, so I think there are lots of good examples on how you can combine them, and that's maybe the ideal. I've also myself worked a bit with painting and then transferring them to digital modes and for photo editing and making digital images. So because it gives a bit more tactility. So that's interesting. So yeah, I think the ideal way is to combine it a bit. But of course, there are some practical issues. You have a workshop with 20, 30 kids. It can make it challenging to move between different modalities, but of course there are many good ways to combine. I think that's the ideal, and that would be how you normally work as an artist, for example, to combine modalities.
Yeah, excellent, cool. So, does anyone have any last questions for Ingri? If not, I'm going to throw in the AI question. So we really need some other questions. Okay. I mean, do you suspect, Ingri, or do you feel, is AI, I mean, you talked about it a little bit, but it's still framed as a technology, if you like. It's still framed as something that can operate at the tool level or sit as something within another system. But more and more increasingly, we're seeing sort of AI agents, or even the invisibility, if you like, of AI environments, operating systems operating at that level anyway. Is this a potential game changer in terms of, well, I suppose at the top level in Norway, does that challenge, if you like, the basic position of, integrating IT into an existing design curriculum? Does it blow that apart in such a way that you have to actually maybe shift strategically? And then right down to what does that actually do for teachers if they're facing this absolute wall and onslaught of generative content or even agent-generated content? Does that change the scale of problem? It's not just about how you incorporate a bit of it, it's how fundamentally that changes, if you like, the thinking of students or even the thinking of teachers in terms of what a design space even is. Do you see that as being a potentially bigger challenge or a containable challenge within the existing frameworks, or does something need to change round about that? Or is that too big a question?
It's a big question, but one thought I have is at least that it might also be positive for early years design education and engaging in those kind of processes yourself, because we see a lot of resistance also against the AI. We see it a lot in the students we have here, but we also see it in younger students, where it actualizes more the analog techniques and working with your hands. And we see a lot of young people completely refusing to use AI in any form. They think it's unethical. But I'm not against it. I see what they're saying, but some are completely refusing to use it due to copyright issues or sustainability issues. I think it's important to use it to understand it, and it can be a partner in many ways in creative processes. But as we see this big resistance in many parts of society, I think it makes making with your hands and using your own brain to think more relevant in a way, because it's this revolt against the AI. So that has been an interesting thing to observe, I think. So, and it can also be good to reflect with the students what are the differences between what happens when you are drawing something from your own imagination, or when you try to articulate something and see what this can be generated. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because that's something that we are noticing in our students. There is a huge. It'd be really interesting we should maybe do a survey and ask colleagues around about the world, just in terms of what the downtake of AI is. What's the resistance? I do remember speaking to a social media expert years and years ago, and they talked about there always being between a 10 and 15% refusal in any population not wanting to engage in any way in any kind of online social media. And that was, 15, 20 years ago. My gut feeling is that the AI one is a little bit larger than that, and we're seeing a lot of rejectors. It's really quite interesting. Yeah, maybe a science fiction future is ahead for us all after all. And could be. Anyway, Ingri, I'm sorry it took you so far into the AI. I didn't want to go there, but thank you very much. I think that was a really interesting insight, and thank you so much for your insights in general. I think there's actually still a lot to learn. I think there's a lot that we can still value in some of the insights we already have about humans engaged with technology, particularly in that education space. As I've said it before, I think it's an incredibly important space, and we dismiss it to our discredit, to be honest. So thank you very much for that, Ingri. And thank you everyone for staying on board and listening in, and your questions as well. As I say, the next session will be in a month's time, and it will be, let me just triple check, I think it's Leslie Ann is going to be hosting it, but she's going to be speaking to Nan O'Sullivan and Ní Botchway, excuse me, who are going to be talking from very different contexts and parts of the world with respect to creating pluriversal and particularly non-colonial forms of design education. So that should be a really interesting conversation. And again, we'll get to see some of the practical insights, not just the talking about it, but the how do you actually see that realised on the ground. But for today, Ingrid, once again, thank you so much for that. Very interesting as always. And I say I'll post a link to the talk, and I'll try to put some links to some of your work as well, Ingri, in the comments on the YouTube channel as well. So thank you very much, everyone, and I hope to see you at the next session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.